This is Michael Hayden, who was formerly director of the CIA and the NSA. So please join me in welcoming Michael Hayden to the stage.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to come and offer my perspective about the future of truth, because my narrow lane is essentially the secret pursuit of secret truth. All right, but it plays to the larger enterprise, and in fact, I think because a bit of my background, I'm very concerned about the future of the larger question of truth. So let me talk a little bit about what it is we do in intelligence. When I go into the Oval Office, and by the way, what I say is applicable at all levels of intelligence, but we'll start with the Oval because it's my most recent experience. The intelligence briefer in the dialogue with the president fundamentally has the task of setting the left and the right-hand boundary of logical, legitimate policy discussion, which is different than saying the intelligence is solely determinative of the best course of action. Left, right-hand boundary, but other legitimate, legitimate factors, values, politics, policy, resources, timing, all come in to that equation, but you set the left and the right-hand boundaries. Now, the boundaries we set are a bit reflective of the kind of language you've heard earlier from this stage in terms of objective reality, truth. I actually am fond of saying that my profession is as much a child of the Enlightenment as any of the other professions you're going to hear discussed up here. It's evidence-based. We base it on fact. We seek data. We try to draw generalized conclusions. On a good day, we have humility in the face of complexity, just like you're supposed to do. So we create these left and right-hand boundaries. Now, what's been really fascinating to me back home is that the high friction points of the Trump administration have been with intelligence, science, scholarship, journalism, and what I will call the judiciary and law enforcement. And what do those five have in common? They are all in their own way evidence-based institutions. Now, truth in lending here, I said intelligence is the thumb here, right? For most of my professional life, we have not been quite grouped that way with those other institutions. Intelligence has kind of been out here, largely about how we acquire information, which could be the subject of a later Nobel weekend, all right, and great debate. But that has been muted in my personal experience. We, the espionage guys, have been welcomed into the fact-based club with open arms because we are indeed fact-based. And we've been equally abused by the current administration. Okay? Intelligence in quotes, fake news, so-called judges, nut job director of the FBI, and so on. All right? So we do have this commonality with other evidence-based institutions, even though very frequently that's not as obvious as it should be. Let me describe for you a little bit of the dynamic of briefing a president of the United States, and this is a bit of a level setting. I mean, we're looking upon this administration as a peculiarity, and there are peculiarities. Right? But there are some commonalities as well. So let me explain it to you the way I explained it to my countrymen back home. The intel guy and the policymaker, the director of CIA and the president, have to get into the same room. And in this case, it's a room in downtown Washington without any corners. All right? It's the Oval Office. But the intel door is labeled facts. The president's door, the policymaker's door, is labeled vision, right? You know, the one you voted for. So that's not illegitimate. Fact, vision. World as it is, that's where we should be anchored. World as we want it to be. He wants to take it to another place. Fact, vision, as is, want to be. Inherently inductive. We swim in a sea of data and try to draw generalized conclusions. inherently deductive, taking the first principles, again, the ones you voted for, and apply to a specific circumstance. Fact, vision, as is, inductive, deductive. Inherently pessimistic. It just comes with the job. Bob Gates, who was DCI before he was Secretary of Defense, fondly says when a CIA analyst stops to smell the flowers, she looks around for the hearse. Okay. Inherently optimistic, otherwise they would not have interviewed with you for the job. Fact, vision, as is, want to be, inductive, deductive, optimistic, pessimistic, permanent condition. And so there's always this step function, this tension that we have to deal with when we've got a new president. I suspect it was the easiest in the history of this relationship when George Herbert Walker Bush was elected president of the United States. Because as many of you know, he used to come into the room through the other door. He used to be the DCI. I suspect it would not have been much of a heavy lift if Secretary Clinton had been elected president. I mean, she had gotten this treatment for 4 years as Secretary of State. I fantasize that the first PDB, President's Daily Briefing, for Secretary Clinton would have begun with something along the lines of her looking at the briefers and saying, "So, where were we?" And just picking it up. There is no doubt that the Creator has seen fit in President Trump to give him more than 3 or 4 additional doses of all these characteristics that I described over here. Okay. This was always going to be higher, harder than average in terms of the fact-based guys getting into the head of the vision-based occupant of the Oval Office because of just the personal traits of Donald Trump, inherently instinctive, intuitive, almost preternaturally confident in his own abilities, in his own judgment. When you look at the kinds of judgments he makes, it is very clear to me that he puts greater stock into who is telling him something and the relationship he may have with that person than what is being told him or the evidentiary train that supports what is being told him. So we always knew if we're going to go brief Donald Trump, it's going to be hard. It is a great American tragedy that the first time we had to go climb that mountain to get over that hump, to begin to break through this particular personality that the Creator had made. It is a great American tragedy. We had to do it over an issue that a lot of other Americans, not the intelligence briefers, but a lot of other Americans were using to delegitimize his election to the presidency of the United States. I can think of no more perfect storm in terms of the perennial task of my guys getting into the head of the person that the nation has decided to impart a great deal of sovereignty on. Michael Gerson is a writer for the Washington Post. Michael used to be George W. Bush's best speechwriter. That second inaugural, the soaring language of that's Michael Gerson. Michael says that Donald Trump lives in the eternal now. Think of that. He lives in the eternal now. For him, there is no history. For him, there is no future, or more accurately, for him, he is fairly indifferent about consequence. The eternal now, you heard Maggie, intensely transactional, no past, no future. Now, a lot of people think the job of intelligence is to go in there and predict the future. That is not true. All right, what's Yogi Berra's line? Predicting's hard, particularly about the future. Okay, so we rarely try to do that. Now, it's a bolt of lightning when we have the moment and we say, we know this is going to happen, and that informs a policymaker. That's good. But by and large, our task is to give this man context. Our job is to give this man historical context, cultural context, economic context. Did I tell you that the president lives in the eternal now? And do you see the challenge that that then creates? I think we saw the worst manifestation of that with that horrific Muslim ban executive order that was shoved out the door on day 2 of the administration. Now, it's not that the president got a briefing on that before he decided to push it out the door. That was coming out the door no matter what. But it was coming out the door absolutely fact-free, based upon that intuitive, preternaturally self-confident, I know how this works view of the world that was reflected in campaign language that said, we have an existential threat being presented to us by refugees, and we have an absolutely dystopian vetting system in terms of who it is we let inside this country. Both of those are absolutely wrong in fact. And my government made a decision that not only was not needed, it made a decision that actually made us less safe. Because by doing that act, we embrace the narrative of the worst parts of Islam, the part that wants to say there is undying enmity between Islam and the Western world. That's what happens when the intel guys don't have a chance to get in there and create the left and the right-hand boundaries of logical policy discussion. Thank you all very much for your attention.